Hi and welcome. I'm Mary Jo, also known as Sojo, and this is part 4 of my 200 plus quilt top series. Now, in parts 1 through 3, I have shown 46 quilt tops. Number 14, I got quilted and I showed in my weekly update number 3. So, in case anybody's new and wondered what I'm doing, let me explain a little bit. I have been quilting for almost 10 years. Well, around 10 years. Now, I've managed to complete many quilts, but I've also accumulated a lot of quilt tops. I estimate that I have over 200, but I don't really know for sure. So I thought it would be fun to start pulling them out one bin at a time and doing a trunk show. I've laid them out on my couch and kind of done like a bed turning or couch turning style trunk show. Now I've started with what I believe are my oldest quilts, and I'm working up to my newer quilts. And we're going to see how far I get. And so far, through parts 1 through 3, I'm up to 46 quilts. And then we'll see how far we get with part 4. Now, as I pull these quilts out, some of them have been away for many years. I try to go through and figure out what the pattern is, where I got it from. However, this time I had one that really stumped me. I have no idea where it came from. I thought it was a Missouri Star pattern, but when I went through and looked through all the tutorials, I couldn't find it, so I'm not really sure. Sojo. Sojo is always a term that I hear when people are talking about how they've lost their sojo with quilting. However, with me, it's always seemed like I've had sojo in abundance. My name, Sojo, just isn't from my name, Mary Jo. It's because I'm always sewing. Now, to me, sewing is something I do when I'm happy, when I'm upset, when I'm working through problems or whatever. It's just something I do. Some of my problems that I have that can really be weighing and wondering how to solve it, when I go sew, sometimes those solutions or problems just magically pop in my head. So it's a very calming thing for me, and it's something I always do. So I always have that sojo in abundance. There's only been one time in my life where I've kind of slowed down with sewing, and that was only because of some physical problems that I was having. So how did someone come up with 200 plus quilt tops? Like I said, I'm always sewing, and I have quilted many and finished many. You know, I would go to a quilt guild meeting and people would do their show and tells and have like 1 or 2 projects. But me, I would come in with these 31 bag totes filled with projects. But my 200 plus quilts, they kind of all started back before the long arm. I had a $50 Walmart Black Friday special sewing machine, and I free motion quilted on that. I free motion quilted king and queen size quilts, because when I started making quilts, if I was going to make a quilt, I wanted at least a good size throw, because I wanted a quilt that I could cover up with. However, the problem came with basting. I hated basting. I had to get down on the floor to baste, and it became quite a challenge. Even though the quilting part could be quite cumbersome, especially with a king and a queen, I would make it work. It was the basting that got me. So things started to pile up then. Now, at my peak, when I was sewing these quilt tops, I would finish about 2 or 3 quilt tops a week. And then once the long arm came, I would quilt maybe 1 or 2 a week, and I would still quilt or manage to sew 1 or 2 tops. So it really didn't make a difference in my quilt top pile. It kind of stayed the same. Now, as things progressed, my long arm that I use is actually at my parents'. My parents live about 30 minutes away, so just there and back is like an hour out of my day. But, you know, I'm a mom with kids that have things going on, plus a job, plus things going on. So sometimes it's not always convenient to go over there. So things started piling up. And then came 2020. And we all know what happened in 2020. Well, due to that and other things going on, my quilting kind of came to a standstill. But even though that came to a standstill, I was still sewing. I still had that sewjo in abundance, so things accumulated even more. So let's go to part 4 and see how many quilt tops we can get in part 4. Part 4. This is number 47, and this was the Ultimate Beginner's Quilt from Fat Quarter Shop. This was a free pattern, and I ended up using the scraps from a Pokemon quilt that I had made for my son. Number 48. This was a free pattern from Fat Quarter Shop, the free Pineapple Day Quilt. But I did use the foundation pads for the 12 and 6-inch pineapples, and it was used a jelly roll and 3 charm packs, plus some background yardage. Number 49. This pattern is named Thistle, and it was by Angela Walters. And this was a free pattern that came from the Midnight Quilt Show from Craftsy. Now this is number 50, and this was something that I kind of just created myself. I had those panels that were in the middle, and then I made some leaf blocks, and then I measured the tiny little panels there in the corner and the middles to be the same size as the leaf blocks, and then I just kind of did some math and worked out the background. Now this was another free pattern that was written for those fabrics, and it is called Northern Light Shimmer. And says it was designed by E. Quilter. Now they didn't have all the fabrics in it, but I had to substitute some for that particular line. But I do remember buying all of this at my favorite quilt store called Country Fabrics in Shiloh, Ohio. Now this is number 52, and this was from a Missouri Star tutorial, and it was made from striped yardage, and then how you cut it produced all the different blocks, and then I just added a border on. Number 53. This was a tutorial from Missouri Star, and the pattern name was called Prairie Flower. And that was made from a layer cake. Number 54. This was a kit that was bought from Fat Quarter Shop, and the name of the pattern was Twirl by It's So Emma. Number 55. Now this is just a mini quilt, and it was bought in a kit that my mother bought somewhere in the Las Vegas area, and the name of the pattern was called Steppin' Up from Mountain Patchwork. '56. Now this is another hand embroidered pattern from Crab Apple Hill Studio from Meg Hawkey, and it's called Spellbound. And this is just a closer look at that hand embroidered pattern in the middle. Number 57. This was another Missouri Star tutorial called the Susanna Quilt, and it was made from a jelly roll. Number 58. Now this was just a small quilt I made from the leftover strips from the previous quilt. '59. Now this was a Bargello quilt that I made with all metallic fabrics. And the name of this pattern was called Island Sunset, and it was from a Twist and Turn Bargello quilt book by Eileen Wright. Bargellos are my favorite quilts. Number 60. Now this was another free pattern from Timeless Treasure called Misty. I believe that was the name of the fabric line too. Oh, I'm sorry. The pattern is called To the Point by Jill Boyd. And I remember buying this at Country Fabrics in Shiloh, Ohio. Number 61. Now this was a pixel quilt, and it was a free pattern from Riley Blake called Yellow Roses of Texas. Number 62. Now this is a mini quilt that I had used with scraps from my stash, and this was a pattern from Thimble Blossoms from Camille Ross Kelly called Stitched with Love. Number 63. Now this was a foundation paper piecing pattern that I had made from fabrics from my scraps. I actually took a class to learn how to foundation paper piece with my mom and 2 cousins, and I did finish that quilt, and it is completely quilted and finished that I hang up every year at Christmas time. But this was just another one I made. Number 64. Now this is a kit that I had bought from Fat Quarter Shop, and the pattern name is Bambino. Number 65. Now this is from Fat Quarter Shop. It's their Barn Block Sampler Quilt. Now this was a block of the month through the Sew Sampler box several years ago. Now I did not buy the kit through them. I bought my own fabrics, which I remember buying those fabrics at Fabric Shack in Waynesville, Ohio, who I believe is now an online only store. Now this is number 66. Now this pattern I couldn't find anywhere, so I don't know where it came from. I thought it may have been a Missouri Star tutorial, but I couldn't find it. I do remember those fabrics are me and my sister design from Moda. All right, well that is the end of part 4, where I'm now up to 66 quilts. Come back and join me next week when we go on to part 5.